On a cold December night in 2009, Susan Powell, wife, mother, and beloved friend, vanished without a trace. No warnings, no goodbyes, just an eerie silence that left behind more questions than answers. Her two young sons awoke to a world forever changed, while investigators scrambled to piece together what had happened. A late-night camping trip, an abandoned car, and a missing woman. The details didn't quite add up. As the days passed, the mystery deepened. Speculation swirled, and unsettling discoveries would soon take the case in an even darker direction. But one question has haunted this case for over a decade. What really happened to Susan Powell that night? A home filled with warmth, a devoted mother, a life that vanished without a trace. This is Derrick Investigates, and I'm Derrick. Tonight we examine the disappearance of Susan Powell, a case that began on a cold December night in 2009 and spiraled into one of the most perplexing mysteries in recent history. One moment, she was there. The next, she was gone. No trace, no explanation, just lingering questions that time has yet to answer. In the days that followed, investigators searched, theories formed, and a series of events unfolded that left a community grasping for the truth. What really happened that night? And why, after more than a decade, does this case remain an unsolved enigma? If the unknown compels you as much as it does me, be sure to like this video and subscribe. Your support helps ensure these stories are never forgotten. Now let's go back to that fateful winter night, where a mother vanished, and the search for answers began. Susan Cox Powell had everything a young mother could cherish: a loving family, two beautiful children, and a home in West Valley City, Utah. Born on October 16, 1981, in Oregon, she was the heart of her close-knit family. Warm, vibrant, and deeply devoted to her sons, Charlie and Braden, motherhood wasn't just a role for Susan, it was her greatest joy. In 2001, she married Joshua Powell. At first, their life together seemed full of promise. They attended church, engaged with their community, and built what appeared to be a stable, happy home. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Friends began noticing subtle changes. Susan confided in those she trusted, speaking of a growing sense of control in her marriage, financial restrictions, relentless criticism, and a weight that seemed to press heavier with time. In journal entries later discovered, she wrote of feeling trapped, afraid, and increasingly desperate to shield her children from the tension at home. Yet, she held on to hope. She worked tirelessly to create a safe, loving world for her boys, masking her pain behind a resilient smile. But those who knew her best feared she was slowly slipping away, caught in a life that no longer felt like her own. December 6th, 2009 started like any other Sunday for Susan Cox Powell. She dressed her young sons, Charlie and Braden, for church and spent the day surrounded by family and friends. That evening, she welcomed a neighbor into her home, sharing conversation over homemade pancakes, a small glimpse into her warmth and generosity. By 5 p.m., the neighbor left, unknowingly becoming the last person outside the family to see Susan. The next morning, concern grew quickly. Susan didn't show up for work, and repeated calls to her phone went unanswered. When co-workers couldn't reach her, they contacted her husband, Josh, but he too was unresponsive. A sense of unease spread through her friends and family. By the afternoon, police were called to check on the Powell home. Inside, they found Susan's purse, wallet, and phone, all left behind. There was no sign of a struggle, but the absence of her belongings suggested she hadn't left by choice. Even more puzzling, Josh and the children were missing too. When Josh finally returned that evening, his explanation only deepened the mystery. He claimed he had taken Charlie and Braden on an unplanned camping trip to Simpson Springs, a remote desert location, in the middle of a freezing winter night. As questions mounted, so did the unease. Where was Susan, and why had a seemingly ordinary night ended in silence? From the start, Josh Powell's account of that night raised questions. Temperatures had plummeted below freezing, hardly the conditions for a spontaneous camping trip with two young children. Yet, that was the explanation he gave when he returned home nearly 24 hours after Susan was last seen. Neighbors recalled strange activity at the Powell home the night before Susan vanished. A strong smell of gasoline lingered in the air, and Josh was seen backing his minivan into the driveway late at night. An unusual sight. Inside the house, investigators found freshly cleaned carpets and a damp spot on the living room floor. Josh brushed it off as an innocent cleaning accident, but forensic teams later examined the area closely. Meanwhile, Susan's belongings, her purse, phone, and wallet, were all left behind, as if she had vanished without any intention of leaving. Then there were the questions no one could ignore. Susan was a devoted mother. Would she have really walked away from the two boys who meant everything to her? And if she didn't, what truly happened on that cold December night? The search begins. As days stretched into weeks, the search for Susan intensified. Volunteers braved the harsh winter conditions of Simpson Springs, scouring miles of rugged terrain in hopes of finding any trace of her. Helicopters scanned the desolate landscape from above, while search dogs moved methodically through the icy ground. Yet despite their relentless efforts, there was nothing, no evidence, no answers. Back at the Powell home, Josh's behavior only deepened the growing unease. He avoided investigators' questions, offering vague or inconsistent responses. When asked about the night Susan disappeared, he remained detached, showing little urgency in finding the mother of his children. Then came a chilling detail, one that would haunt investigators. During a routine conversation, Susan's young son Charlie made an unsettling remark. "Mummy went camping with us, but she didn't come back." It was a simple statement from a child too young to understand the weight of his words, but for those searching for Susan, it raised even more troubling questions. A growing storm of suspicions. As the search for Susan continued, attention shifted to Josh, not just for answers, but for his troubling lack of involvement. He showed little interest in aiding investigators and refused to take a polygraph test, insisting it wasn't necessary. His reluctance only fueled public doubt, raising more questions about what he might be hiding. Meanwhile, investigators combed through financial records and found signs of strain, mounting debt, financial instability, and a household under pressure. These discoveries added another layer to an already complex case, suggesting that turmoil within the Powell family ran deeper than it seemed. Then came an even more unsettling revelation. Susan's disappearance cast a spotlight on Josh's father, Stephen Powell, whose behavior had long raised concerns. When authorities searched his belongings, they uncovered journals and recordings, disturbing evidence of an obsessive fixation on Susan. The findings revealed a family dynamic far from ordinary, hinting at dysfunctions that may have played a role in the events leading up to that fateful night. From the moment Susan Powell vanished, her husband Josh's account raised questions. He claimed he had taken their two young sons on a last-minute camping trip at midnight in the dead of winter, with freezing temperatures and no real preparation. The timing was unsettling. He left just hours before Susan was last seen, and returned only after friends had already sounded the alarm over her disappearance. Investigators pressed him for details, but his story remained unchanged, even as contradictions emerged. Inside the Powell home, detectives found a puzzling scene: damp carpets, the sharp smell of cleaning products, and an unexplained wet spot on the couch. Yet, despite their suspicions, nothing in the home directly linked Josh to a crime. Still, Susan's own words hinted at an underlying fear. In personal writings, she had expressed deep concerns about her marriage, once stating, "If I die, it may not be an accident, even if it looks like one." It was a chilling note that suggested Susan had long feared something terrible might happen. What strikes me about this case is the way fear leaves a paper trail. When someone repeatedly voices concerns about their safety, we cannot afford to ignore them. Too often, cases like Susan's reveal a pattern: subtle warnings, overlooked distress signals, and a sense of impending danger that only becomes clear in hindsight. As the investigation deepened, Josh's actions became increasingly unusual. Rather than showing concern for his missing wife, he avoided questions, refused polygraph tests, and kept their children away from law enforcement. Then, In a sudden move, he packed up his belongings and left Utah, relocating to Puyallup, Washington, to live with his father, Susan Powell. The move only added another layer of unease. Susan Powell's behavior had long raised eyebrows, but as investigators looked closer, troubling details surfaced. He had made disturbing claims about Susan, suggesting, without basis, that she had pursued him romantically. A search of his home revealed an even darker reality: hidden journals, photographs, and video recordings exposing an unsettling obsession with his daughter-in-law. Though Stephen was eventually arrested on separate charges of voyeurism and child exploitation, the revelations about his behavior led investigators to question just how deep the dysfunction in the Powell family ran, and whether it held the key to understanding what really happened to Susan. As investigators searched for answers, their focus turned to Josh Powell's midnight camping trip. Could the vast Utah wilderness hold the key to Susan's fate? Search teams scoured remote deserts and abandoned mine shafts, chasing every lead and the faintest trace of evidence. Cadaver dogs signaled potential human remains in certain areas, yet despite their efforts, no definitive answers emerged. The frustration was mounting. Every trail went cold, and every search led to dead ends. But what weighed heaviest on investigators was the growing certainty that Josh knew exactly what had happened to Susan, and he wasn't talking. By 2012, Josh had lost custody of his two sons, Charlie and Braden, to Susan's parents, Chuck and Judy Cox. A judge deemed his home environment unsafe, especially after his father's arrest on unrelated charges. It seemed like a turning point, a moment where the truth might finally come to light. But on February 5th, 2012, everything changed. During a supervised visit with his sons at his rented home in Washington, Josh made a chilling decision. He locked the social worker outside. Moments later, an explosion tore through the house. In an instant, Josh, Charlie, and Braden were gone. Investigators quickly determined the fire was no accident. Josh had meticulously planned the murder-suicide, soaking the home in gasoline, sending last-minute emails to family members, and even giving away his son's toys in the days prior. His final act ensured that whatever secrets he held about Susan's disappearance would die with him. With both Josh and his father gone, the full truth of what happened to Susan remains elusive. Many believe she lies somewhere in Utah's unforgiving wilderness, perhaps hidden deep in a mine shaft or buried in a place only Josh knew. Others wonder if he had a more calculated plan, ensuring she would never be found. Susan's parents, Chuck and Judy Cox, refused to let her story fade. They have become relentless advocates for domestic violence awareness, pushing for laws to protect vulnerable families. Through their fight for justice, Susan's name continues to stand as a symbol of resilience and the search for truth. More than a decade later, Susan Powell's disappearance remains one of the most haunting unsolved cases in recent history. Without definitive evidence, the questions linger. Yet her story continues to shape conversations about safety, justice, and the silent struggles many face behind closed doors. Even in uncertainty, Susan's legacy endures. The explosion that took the lives of Josh Powell and his sons left a deep scar, not just on the Powell and Cox families, but on everyone who had followed the case. It was a moment of finality, a chilling realization that with Josh's death, the truth about Susan Powell's fate might have been lost forever. For investigators, the tragedy felt like a calculated act of defiance. Josh had orchestrated every step, leaving behind messages devoid of remorse, confession, or clarity. The answers that had seemed within reach were now sealed away, possibly forever. For Chuck Cox, Susan's father, the explosion was more than just a devastating loss. It was the moment Josh succeeded in taking everything. His daughter was still missing, and now his grandsons were gone too. Yet even in the depths of grief, Chuck remained steadfast. "We may never know where Susan is," he once said, "but we'll never stop looking." The tragedy was not just a singular event. It was the culmination of years of secrecy, manipulation, and quiet desperation. In the months leading up to the explosion, investigators had been closing in on new leads. Searches in Utah's remote desert regions had uncovered potential clues. Cadaver dogs had alerted near mine shafts, and digital forensic teams were sifting through Josh's computer files, believing they might contain key evidence. At the same time, Josh had grown increasingly paranoid. The pressure of the investigation was mounting, and law enforcement believed he feared what might come next. Then, in one final, irreversible act, he ensured that whatever secrets he held would never be uncovered. The explosion destroyed not just lives, but also the possibility of closure. It left investigators with a painful question. Had they come too close to the truth? Had the walls been closing in on Josh so fast that he saw no other way out? Despite the heartbreak, Susan's case became a turning point. Her parents channeled their grief into action, advocating for reforms to protect children in high-risk custody situations. Their efforts led to the passage of Susan's Law, tightening regulations around supervised visits for parents with a history of violence or instability. The case was more than just an unsolved mystery. It became a rallying cry for change. Yet, after all these years, there has been no final revelation, no definitive answer. The absence of closure remains the most haunting part of this case. Many believe Susan's body still lies somewhere in Utah's vast wilderness, hidden in a place only Josh knew. Others wonder if he had devised a more elaborate plan, one that ensured she would never be found. As investigators and her family continue to hold on to hope, one truth remains. Susan Powell's case is more than a story of one woman's disappearance. It is a reminder of the devastating impact of control, manipulation, and the unseen dangers that exist behind closed doors. The echoes of her story linger in every unanswered question, every untouched stretch of desert, and every heart still longing for justice. Susan Powell vanished without a trace. Years later, the questions remain. Could her fate have been different, or was the truth buried from the start? Cases like this expose the cracks in the systems meant to protect the vulnerable and reveal how control and secrecy can erase a life. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. At Derrick Investigates, we don't just tell stories. We examine the unanswered questions that still demand justice. Every case brings us closer to uncovering the truth behind the mysteries that refuse to fade. If this case resonated with you, like, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive and the conversations going. Until next time, stay curious, stay aware, and never stop seeking the truth. I'm Derrick, and I'll be back soon with another investigation.